Hello everybody and welcome to Sin City Living. My name is Jason. I'm bringing you today's episode. As always, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We have a ton of content coming out every single week, every single day. We've got content filmed and posting. So you don't want to miss a thing. So again, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. And our usual shout out of appreciation to our patrons. We definitely appreciate all those tips and support. Just going to go towards making the channel better. I hope you guys are enjoying those exclusive videos just for you guys that we're releasing every single week. And I'm thinking about, if time permits, with a full-time job and child, thinking about filming some other special videos for you guys on the some of the subjects, such as the darker side of Vegas or some of the history of Vegas. Anything you guys might like to see, just shoot us an email on the site. For everybody else, if there's anything you want to see, be it on craps, blackjack, baccarat, any of the games, or Vegas or casinos in general, just have any questions, shoot us an email, sincitylivingLV@gmail.com. One of my favorite things to do is to shoot the videos for you guys based on your requests. So otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into today's video. And today, for the darker side of Vegas, I want to discuss what could be an unsolved crime or just a odd little mystery. But I want to talk about boxing legend Sonny Liston. So Sonny Liston, in 1971, I think it was January 5th, 1971, Sonny Liston's wife, Geraldine, was coming home from 2 weeks gone on a vacation, visiting family and such. And she was actually coming home early because she had been trying to reach Sonny for quite some time and no answer whatsoever. So she got a little concerned, so she came on home. And when she got home and she opened the door, she smelled an odd smell. So she thought that Sonny had maybe cooked something and forgotten about it in the kitchen or whatnot. So first she went to check the kitchen, no food in there, started getting a little concerned. Went back to the bedroom and found Sonny Liston's body. Now, even at this very, very, I guess not standard, but you find the body, and of course you call, you make the phone calls you need to take. But even at this, the kind of the beginning of the story, though I'm going to jump back in time a little bit. It still has some very, very odd things associated with it. For instance, it was hours until the police were called, or paramedics or anything else like that. Geraldine made a number of phone calls. She eventually managed to reach a doctor to come on by to theoretically help Sonny, but all he could do was confirm that, yep, he's a goner. He gonzo. And then eventually they get the paramedics, the coroner out and the police out to take the body away. And again, this guy was a legendary heavyweight boxer. This guy was massive. So apparently the great weight of his body made it very difficult for them to carry him out. So they dropped him a few times. But this gap of a few hours ends up adding a little bit of questions to the story of what may or may not have happened. That all gets very, very interesting. And there's theories. There's a lot of theories about what could have happened, what may or may not have happened. And I'm very much going to touch on those theories. But I actually want to go back in time a little bit. We're going to go back in time a little bit, and we're going to discuss Sonny Liston. We're going to talk about how he, I guess you could say, came about. So Sonny Liston was born on a dark and cloudy night. No, I'm just kidding. Sonny Liston was born in Arkansas, and he was born to a very, very poor family, a sharecropper family. Very poor, but we can definitely say they were very prolific. Clearly, this is in the time before television and radio, so there wasn't a whole lot to do at night. So Sonny Liston was the 24th of 25 children. So yeah, we can make a guess where his parents found their entertainment at. But a lot of kids. Now, even at birth, even going all the way back to his birth, there's already mysteries surrounding Sonny Liston because Back then, birth certificates were not a legal requirement, so he didn't have one. So it makes a lot of questions come up just on the simple question of how old was he? You know, keep in mind, this guy was a heavyweight boxer, heavyweight champion of the world at one point. And their theory is he was approximately 40 years old at the date of his death. However, there are some people who have suggested that he may have even been closer to 50 years old. And if that is the case, then when he was in his prime boxing, he was a lot older than most in their prime boxers would have been. Now, because of his size and his skill level, he was a terrifying boxer. But still, I mean, even at his very beginning, nobody knows exactly how old Sonny Liston was. Now, his family eventually packed up and they moved to St. Louis. And at this point, now Sonny Liston had been teased relentlessly. Because he had a poor family, poor upbringing. He was beaten at home. And there's never any reason for that. I can't even imagine 25 kids running around though, and just the stress of that. So he was beaten. He obviously was probably hungry fairly often. He even said we hardly ever had enough food to eat to keep from starving. We had no shoes. We had very few clothes. Nobody to help us escape from this horrible life that we had. And he even said, Sonny Liston's exact words at one point, where we grew up like heathens. Now, because of all this, and possibly maybe it just wasn't his cup of tea, Sonny Liston struggled badly in school. He struggled very, very, very badly, and I'm sure his home life certainly didn't help. Definitely weren't supportive, definitely weren't helping to educate him themselves. So he was teased nonstop because he was unable to read or write. And when his family left Arkansas, they eventually moved to St. Louis, and Sonny Liston basically said, enough, done, thrown in the towel, forget about it. He was done with education. Didn't even try. He was just finito. And now, if you have no education, you're poor and come from a poor family, so you have no education, you have nothing to bring to the table, work is going to be rather difficult to find, especially back in those days, and especially for a young black man like Sonny Liston, because back then, most of the United States was still very heavily segregated, and there was still a lot of racism going on back then, and very overt racism going on back then. So Sonny didn't really find that he had any options other than to turn to crime, which is what he did. He was just a petty thief, or not a petty thief, petty criminal, probably relying on his formidable strength and size at that point. But he was apparently so well known to the police in that area that they actually had a picture of Sonny Liston on the visor of their police cars. They were always chasing Sonny. He was always in trouble, and he kind of reveled in it. A lot of the qualities that eventually made him a great boxer were definitely apparent even at this time. He was very arrogant. He was very cocky. He had an incredible belief in his own abilities, and he leaned on his strength and his natural physical talents, his size, his speed, his strength, a lot. There is the story of when Sonny Liston at one point as a late teen, early 20s, very early 20s, likely late teen, petty criminal, was cornered by a police officer, and he started a fight with the cop, beat him senseless, stole his gun, picked him up and threw him into an alley, and then just walked off wearing his police hat. That was the kind of personality Sonny Liston had back then. He basically made his living even back then with his fists and his size and his strength and his power. Basically, that's where he got his power. Now, he was eventually convicted of armed robbery at approximately 22 years of age. Again, we have absolutely no clue. He could have been closer to 32. Unknown, but likely he was probably around 22 years old. He was sent to Missouri State Penitentiary, and that's where he kind of got his break. Going to prison was almost a his break, because he ended up meeting a Father Stevens. Father Stevens was a Catholic priest, was the prison priest. He was a Catholic priest, but he also ran the prison gym. And he was utterly fascinated and impressed with Sonny Liston. I mean, his exact words were, he was the most perfect specimen of manhood I've ever seen. Now, if you say that nowadays, it's going to be a little bit creepy. But back then, powerful arms, big shoulders. Pretty soon he was knocking out everybody in the gym. His hands were so large, I couldn't believe it. There are reports that I've read somewhere that said Sonny Liston's fist was, I want to say they said it was 15 inches around, 18 inches around. It was something just absolutely massive. His hands were just huge. I've seen pictures of his fist up in comparison to other people that were standing next to him, and it's just insane. The man had some fists. He had some fists. So Sonny Liston spent 2 years in jail before he was paroled. He was paroled in approximately 1953, and that's where his life took a big turn, both a good and a bad turn. That's where he turned pro. He found an outlet for his violence and for his physical power, and turned professional, and also found a living that way. Unfortunately, at that time, boxing was not as legitimately controlled as it is now. So Sonny Liston's turning pro as he's getting out of prison in 1953, but he's running into a couple of stumbling blocks. Stumbling block number one was the fact that he was an ex-con, but one of his biggest stumbling blocks was the fact that he was so big, so muscular, so imposing, so scary that he was having difficulty getting fights. And back then, if you really wanted to succeed as a boxer, you needed to have representation. You needed to have some real heavyweight representation, because it's your representation that was going to be able to get you these fights that were going to put you on the map and help you, increase your career, so on and so forth. And back then, boxing was basically mob control. Some of the reports that I've read, they refer to Sonny Liston as the last great professional boxer that was basically handed to the mob. He basically just started from the get-go working for the mob. Because back then, again, the mob controlled most of boxing, and the mob was able to use their own influence, their own power, their own money to get Sonny Liston fights. And Sonny Liston was a prime candidate for the mob, because if the mob's controlling boxing, they want to be able to put up winners. They want to be able to put up people with some potential, and Sonny Liston had idiotic amounts of potential, because again, the guy was just absolutely massive, strong, fast, athletic, powerful. This was the guy, they look at this guy and go, this guy can box, this guy could win, this guy could be something big in boxing, which is exactly what the mob wanted, because that's how they're going to make money. They're going to make money off of Sonny Liston. So that's what they did. Their exact words were, he's the last great investment the mob made in boxing. So, again, they were really attracted to him because of his talent. I mean, he was just incredible. In order for him to be a worthwhile investment, because they were going to use their muscle and their money to get him fights, he needed to be able to win fights. Well, as it turned out, he absolutely could win fights. He eventually had a record of 50 wins and 4 losses with 39 knockouts. His power was just insane. His power was frightening. His power and his intensity were absolutely frightening. Just his jab was concussive. I mean, it was an explosion. And his stare down, his war face, whatever you want to call it, was extremely intimidating. It's like he was able to just burn people to the core. Even Muhammad Ali would say it. Muhammad Ali was quoted as saying, of all the people that he had ever fought, Sonny Liston was by far the scariest. And another writer wrote that Liston didn't just defeat his opponents, he breaks them, he shames them, he humiliates them, he haunts them. He leaves them so broken and frightened and haunted of this this beat down that they got, that they're flinching in their dreams from his punches. And he exploited this reputation. He used this reputation, and he went on an impressive run of wins in the late 50s and early 60s. Now, it wasn't helped by the fact that at the time the media was extraordinarily racist, and they would use phrases, very subtle, not subtle, but thinly veiled phrases to insult Sonny Liston. They would use things like guerrilla power and things along those lines. So the press was really stoking the flames amongst the racist part of white America. And they were portraying Sonny Liston as this brute. I mean, one New York Times columnist wrote, he's arrogant, surly, mean, rude, and altogether frightening. Last man anyone would want to meet in a dark alley. And they always were using these terms, gorilla, beast, when they were describing him. Even the president got involved. President Kennedy, JFK, John F. Kennedy, when Sonny Liston was going to face Floyd Patterson, Kennedy actually said that actually urged Patterson to find an opponent with better character. And because of this, because of the media being so against Sonny Liston, now he was mob controlled, he was arrogant, he was highly uneducated, and again, very powerful. So people were definitely scared of him. So he was painted as just this absolute misanthrope, absolute outsider. Stay away from this guy. This guy is trouble. And it didn't help when he went up against Floyd Patterson, who was a very, very popular boxer at that time. Very, very, very well liked. He was hugely liked. And Sonny Liston destroyed him in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes and 6 seconds to win the heavyweight title. This was in 1962. Now, Sonny Liston was, after he won the title, he's heading home to Philadelphia, and he's stoked, he's amped. He just won the heavyweight title of the world. He figures he made it big, and he's expecting that when he gets home, there's just going to be a mob of reporters and people wanting to interview him and talk to him. And he even practiced his speech on the plane. Well, much to his disappointment, when Sonny Liston returned home, there was nobody. When he got off the plane, there was nobody. He had this big speech about how he's going to be a role model for the black race, and nobody there. Nobody there. And apparently, despite how immense, intense, and frightening he was, it kind of made him almost retreat into a shell in a little bit. But what made it worse is that it wasn't just the segregation, the white America that shunned Sonny Liston, but the civil rights movement did as well. The civil rights movement wanted nothing to do with Sonny Liston because of his time as in jail, because he was an ex-convict, had spent time in jail for violent crimes, armed robbery, and because of his very strong, very well-known, very out there mob connections. Both of those things combined meant that the civil rights movement, they didn't want him as any kind of spokesperson for them or as any kind of face for the civil rights, anything along those lines. They wanted to be as distanced from Sonny Liston as absolute possible. So, Sonny Liston continued to work with the mob. He didn't have a whole lot of other things to do, so theoretically, supposedly, he worked as an enforcer and a leg breaker in addition to boxing for the mob. And that is how he continued his life all the way up until things went really, really south. When he lost to Muhammad Ali, that's when his luster, his allure started to fade, because he was no longer being looked at as the most dangerous man in the world. Because despite how he was shunned by the civil rights movement, how he was just reviled by white America as well, he was still known as an incredible boxer, as possibly the greatest boxer out there, and the most dangerous man in America, or the most dangerous man in the world. And then he lost to Muhammad Ali, who at the time was still going by Cassius Clay, and so he lost by losing to Muhammad Ali, his luster started to fade a little bit. At least the fearsome reputation that he had started to fade. People weren't so terrified of Sonny Liston anymore. Even though, again, Muhammad Ali did say that he was the scariest of everybody he ever faced. But what really sank Sonny Liston is the rematch. And even if you're not a boxing fan, you have probably heard or seen a video or something regarding the most notorious part of the rematch. So in Sonny Liston's rematch with Muhammad Ali, the fight didn't even last 2 minutes. It made it less than 2 minutes before Sonny Liston hit the canvas and was staggering and rolling around, and Muhammad Ali is standing over him, screaming at him, get up, you're supposed to be bad, nobody's going to believe this, you're supposed to be bad, and screaming at him to get up. That's actually one of the more iconic photographs of Muhammad Ali, is him standing over Sonny Liston, screaming at him. You can't tell from the black and white photographs, but he's screaming at him to get up, you're supposed to be bad, you're supposed to be tough. Nobody's going to believe this. Muhammad Ali actually said that. Now, what's known as the phantom punch it's been analyzed over and over and over ad nauseum to infinity. And there's never going to be an answer to this. There's absolutely never going to be an answer to this. Some people believe that Liston was caught with a perfect right hook. Other people believe he took a dive, that he was ordered to take a dive by the mob. Nobody is ever going to know for sure. There's absolutely no way to know. But we'll say this: even Sonny Liston's wife thought that he took a dive. Even she actually said that he gave it away. She says she doesn't know if he was paid to or not, but she believes that he threw the fight. But whether or not it was true, the public just annihilated Sonny Liston. They just destroyed him. He was already hated. He was already shunned, and now they just ruined him. I mean, he was labeled as corrupt, and he was embarrassed on boxing's biggest stage. He was called nothing but a mafia stooge, a bum, and it took its toll on him. And after that fight, that's really where his decline started. He moved to Las Vegas, and he did continue attempting to box. He did still box. Now, when he moved to Vegas, he was almost broke. Now, considering that he'd been the heavyweight champion in the world, that seems kind of odd until you keep in mind that he was mob controlled. So they most likely were skimming most of his earnings while he was boxing for them. So he had to keep working, and he kept working. There's only one thing he knew how to do. So he's continued working with the mob, working for the loan sharks and the drug. Basically, he continued being an enforcer, a leg breaker, a thug, and he was publicly humiliated when he moved to Las Vegas. He didn't have a whole lot going for him, because this public humiliation too, it was one of two things, neither one of which is going to help Sonny Liston. Option number one, this public humiliation he is facing is entirely his own fault because he took a dive. Or option number two, he looked like a bum and was knocked out in a minute 40 seconds or so. Either one doesn't help. Either one has him completely, totally humiliated, and the public firmly believing that Sonny Liston is just a bum, just a charlatan, a fake that just fought a bunch of tomato cans, that folded like a cheap lawn chair the first time he faced a quality, skilled boxer. So either way, either he's a bum with a glass chin, or he took a dive. Either one doesn't help him. Either one just utterly humiliates him. But he was still convinced that he could resurrect his career, and he did continue boxing in Vegas, or rather after his two defeats to Ali, and actually won 14 fights in a row. He was hoping to eventually recapture the heavyweight title, but in 1969, so just a little bit over a year before his death, he fought his old sparring partner, and his old sparring partner knocked him out cold. Apparently, it was a brutal knockout. And that pretty much just put the kibosh on any thoughts that Sonny Liston had at that time of continuing to pursue another shot at the heavyweight championship of the world. And so what really ended up defining the tail end of Sonny Liston's life is the double life he started leading. So Sonny Liston and his family were living in Paradise Palms, and he was kind of despite his humiliation and all that, he was kind of a local celebrity. He would sign autographs and shake hands and such at the local casinos, but that was his family life. Las Vegas back then was heavily segregated, and the West Side was the more rundown, poor, and segregated side. And at night, Sonny Liston would drive his pink Cadillac. He actually had a pink Cadillac. Would drive his pink Cadillac to the West Side and became a fixture in the West Side. And he was known for a number of things: for drinking, for being found in bars and casinos out there drinking. He was connected to and started being known for even dealing a little bit of cocaine out of one of the casinos, and getting involved in heroin, and even getting with some very shady characters. There was a beautician. Let me see if I can find the name around here somewhere. A beautician named Earl Cage. Earl Cage was busted in a drug raid at his house. When the police busted in, Sonny Liston was there. And there are accounts saying that they were actually afraid they were going to have to shoot Liston because Sonny wasn't backing down. He wasn't backing off. So he was connected to these drug dealers. He was connected to mob people. And he also had an ability to tick them off as well. He ran into an old mob acquaintance, Mo Dalitz, at one point in Vegas, who was a rising star within the mob and become very powerful, especially in Vegas. And as a joke, Liston cocked his fist at Dalitz, and Mo Dalitz looked at him and said, "If you hit me, you better kill me, because I will immediately make one phone call, and within 24 hours, you'll be dead." And that was not a joke, not a joke at all. So Sonny was living this double life, family man, and then out on the darker side of town. And he was involved in some very dangerous characters, even outside of the organized crime. I mean, he had ticked off a Cleveland mob boss at one point just for not being as respectful as the boss thought he should have been. But outside of that, he's hanging out with drug dealers and loan sharks. And when you get involved with the drug side of things, you were involved with some very dangerous people. So now I'm going to jump forward in time, back to his death. So his death, when the cops arrive, the cops come in to start their investigation, to look into things. And one of the first things they find is a little balloon full of heroin, which at the time was a very common way to transport the heroin. And they found needle tracks on Sonny Liston, on his body. And when they did a toxicology on him, they found what are common breakdowns of heroin, morphine, and I believe it was codeine or something along those lines. But two other opioids that are common breakdowns of heroin in the system. However, they couldn't quite find enough. The coroner was not able to positively say that Sonny Liston had died because of a drug overdose or because of heroin or anything along those lines. So he ended up ruling, the Clark County coroner ended up ruling Sonny Liston's death as natural causes. I think it was brought about by lung congestion and heart failure, basically. And that definitely raised a lot of questions. Also, needle tracks, the breakdown of heroin in the system, heroin on the table, but they found nothing else. The cops found no needles. The cops didn't find a spoon for cooking the heroin. They didn't find any of the other drug paraphernalia. However, that was very common back then for families to hide that stuff when a death occurred. And remember, there was hours in between when Sonny Liston's wife found his body and she called the police. So there's a lot of suspicion that Geraldine Liston cleaned up most of the drug paraphernalia, or all the drug paraphernalia, to try and preserve Sonny Liston's reputation, I suppose. But here's where it gets interesting, is that one of Sonny Liston's longtime associates said there's just absolutely no way that Sonny Liston could have been doing heroin, could have been shooting himself with heroin or anything, because he was deathly afraid of needles. He'd refused to go to the doctor, refused to go to the hospital, because he was afraid that they were going to want to give him shots. He turned down a fight in another country because he was afraid to get the inoculations that they were supposed to give, that he would have had to have in order to go to this country. So on the one hand, you've got one of Sonny Liston's associates and longtime friends saying, hey, this guy's been terrified of needles his whole life. But on the other hand, you have people within Vegas that knew Sonny Liston, that say it was common knowledge that he was involved in with heroin, he was involved with cocaine, that he was getting heavily involved in drugs. So, you've got these two different accounts of Sonny Liston's personality right beforehand, and then you have these other questions. I mean, they put it down as lung congestion, lung failure, and heart failure. But people are wondering, how does this guy who is, I mean, it's not that long since that boxing match with his former training partner. So Sonny Liston was still hoping to be he wasn't hoping to be a heavyweight champion anymore, but he was still in shape. He was still a prime specimen athlete. So people were very curious, how does this prime specimen athlete at 40 years old die of natural causes? Now, we all know that things like this can happen. There's undiagnosed medical issues and things like that. So we know it can happen, but it doesn't happen all that often. And it just becomes suspicious when it's such a high-profile figure who happens to be leading a double life, who happen to be very heavily mob-connected. And that's where so many of these questions come from. There's all these different theories with Sonny Liston and his death on what could have happened. No way to know, and we will never know. I mean, it's been 50 years. We'll never know. The people that were connected, people that would have firsthand knowledge of what may or may not have happened that night are all gone, or very nearly gone. It won't be too much longer till there will be nobody left living that knew Sonny Liston. So we're likely to never know what actually happened, but there's just so many possibilities. I mean, he ticked off mob bosses. They even say that his last fight that he won, he was supposed to throw it and he refused. That would have ticked off the mob bosses and probably cost them a lot of money, which would have ticked off the mob bosses. There's also some question of, were they afraid that Sonny knew too much? I mean, did he take a dive on the Phantom Punch? If so, is he ever going to talk about it? If he ever talks about it, he's going to finger the mob for that. So there's a lot of concern amongst the mob of all these things that he could have done, or he could have gotten sideways of, or that possibly he just knew too much. Because again, he wasn't just a boxer for the mob. He worked for them. He was an enforcer, a leg breaker, so on and so forth, which means he knew a lot about their business and things that known names were involved in. So Sonny Liston had a lot of knowledge that could have hurt the mob, could have hurt the mob's reputation, or just could have hurt the mob, send people to jail, things along those lines. Right? Then there's also some of the concerns with his drugs. Separate from the mob, he was known for the drugs and known for hanging out with drug dealers and known for all of this stuff, to the point where, like with the Earl Cage bust, he was actually warned by the cops to his face beforehand that, hey, we're going to raid this guy, you need to not be there. And he had been warned multiple times in other instances as well about upcoming drug raids and stuff like that, to not be present for it. So there also could have been a lot of concern on the drug dealer side of things, or the drug side of things, that possibly Sonny Liston was an informant. He could have looked that way when there were multiple raids going on, and he was always mysteriously not there when he was so heavily involved in the drug scene, and otherwise was always at these parties and get-togethers and stuff like that. But then the one time there's a raid, he's not there. So There were reports and interviews with people about Sonny Liston where almost all of them would say, you know, I could think of 5 or 6 people that would want him dead. So there's a lot of suspicion that Sonny Liston was taken out by the mob. Now, you also get this question of, well, that's not really the mob style. The mob style is what you see in the movies. It's flashy, or it makes a statement. You know, empty the clip. Well, not back then. They weren't using automatics all that often. But, you know, just, you know, light them up. And light them up on the street. Light them up in a restaurant. Leave them laying there as a message. So, you know, people do like to say that, well, that wasn't, you know, what happened to him, you know, a possible overdose, a possible forced overdose is the suspicion. Couldn't have been the mob. It must have been the drug dealers. They still think that he was murdered and it wasn't accidental, but they think that it was drug dealers, not the mob. But at that time, the mob was also trying to transition away from the flashy stuff, especially the stuff that can make the news. They were more looking to be subtle about things, and the subtlety of forcing a drug overdose to make it look like natural causes or an accident or a suicide is exactly within what the mob was trying to do back then. So it's possible, because there are those suspicions that he was taken out, gotten drunk, and then brought home and just injected, just to make sure that he was done for. And again, there's no way to know, but there are people that say for that time period that was actually kind of a typical execution style, and would even explain if they got him drunk until he passed out, or possibly even spiked his drinks. That is another one of the suspicions. And then took him home and did this while he was passed out. It might also explain how someone who supposedly had this lifelong fear of needles ended up with needle marks on him. That's assuming that he didn't overcome this lifelong fear of needles, because there's other reports, such as not too long before Sonny Liston's body was found by his wife, he'd been involved in a car accident. And he'd spent some time clutching his chest. So there was some thought that maybe there was some damage to his heart. Maybe he did have a heart attack. Maybe he weakened his heart. Or possibly he'd been in pain and he was self-medicating as a way of relieving that pain and overdosed accidentally. There's all these theories, and these theories are never going to be answered. They're going to persist until infinity, because he was such a larger-than-life figure back then, and so famous, and then such a mysterious way for him to go. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of The Darker Side of Vegas. And please, as always, hit the like and subscribe buttons. And stay tuned for Thursday, 7 o'clock, when we go over Vegas histories. We have a viewer request. We are going to be going over the story of Meyer Lansky, mob boss extraordinaire. Catch you guys next time. Bye now.